So, imagine this. I get home one day after a brutal shift, thinking about nothing more than collapsing on my couch and maybe eating something that doesn't come from a wrapper. I step into my apartment and right away my eyes lock onto this mess. Stuff. A lot of stuff. And not just the usual clutter I somehow managed to let pile up. No, this was definitely someone else's stuff. There were dishes in the sink, none of which I recognized, and a couple of coffee mugs sitting by the corner of the kitchen counter, one of them with lipstick on the rim. A backpack was casually tossed by the door, and a pair of sneakers covered in mud sat awkwardly next to my own like it was trying too hard to settle in. I blinked, sure my brain was playing some post-workday trick on me. Wait, what the hell? I muttered to myself, mouth dry, feeling this weird tangle of confusion and a creeping kind of unease. I went to the fridge. No, the fridge looked normal, stocked exactly how I like it. But why was there a note stuck to the door? A note that started with, "Hey, Alex here. Left my laundry in the machine. We'll get it tonight." Alex? Who the hell was Alex? I mean, sure, I had my fair share of roommates in the past who left all kinds of chaos behind, but I was pretty sure I was living alone now. Months without a roommate, finally found a little place of my own in this mid-sized city, and here was some mystery, Alex apparently cohabiting without my knowledge. I paced, checked every room in my apartment. Nothing else looked out of place except for the fact that there was undeniably someone else's presence lingering in my space. I whipped out my phone, scrolling through texts, emails, looking for any mention of an Alex. Nothing. No messages, no calls, no notes about a lease transfer or subletter. Just me and what I thought was my solo kingdom. It's weird, right? That heart-skip feeling when you start questioning what you know is fact. Like, am I losing it? Did I forget signing some contract? Was this some wild prank? All the typical thoughts sprinted through my head while I stared at the kitchen counter like it had just betrayed me. That's when I heard the soft rustling sound from the living room. I whipped around to see a figure. A guy, about my height, casual but oddly calm, standing there, as if all this mess belonged to him. "So, you must be Alex," I said, my voice cracking somewhere between curiosity and disbelief. He gave me this half grin, leaning casually against the wall, and replied, "Yeah, that'd be me. You wouldn't believe how long it took me to find the place." Right then, I realized this wasn't some prank. This guy believed he belonged here, like this was his apartment as much as mine, or maybe even more. And suddenly, the whole situation just got a whole lot stranger. I've always considered myself a pretty laid-back guy. Nothing too flashy, no big drama in my life. I mean, aside from the usual chaos of everyday stuff. After bouncing around from cramped studios to one too many bad roommates, snagging this little solo apartment felt like hitting the jackpot. Finally, my own space where I could crash, cook, and maybe play terrible music without anyone giving me side eyes. The place itself? Nothing fancy, but cozy enough. A modest one-bedroom on the third floor of a quirky old building in the heart of the city. Hardwood floors that creaked just enough to keep things interesting. Walls adorned with tiny nail holes from previous tenants' haphazard decorating, and a kitchen that wasn't exactly chef-grade, but perfect for my late-night cereal binges and occasional stir-fry experiments. Oh, and the big plus? That balcony overlooking the street, a little slice of freedom where I could sip on a cold drink, watch the world hustle by, and feel like I finally carved out a tiny kingdom just for me. So, when I came home that day to find a pile of unclaimed stuff sprawled across my kitchen counter, it felt like the exact opposite of what I signed up for. And then to have some guy, Alex, just standing there like he'd been there all along, man, that was confusing. Especially because I was pretty sure I didn't sign any paperwork to share this place. No subleases, nada. Alex wasn't exactly what I expected either. He had this calm, almost too casual vibe, like the guy was ready to sit down and share a beer rather than explain himself. He wasn't looming or aggressive, just oddly comfortable. His backpack was canvas and ratty, like he lived out of it, and his sneakers, muddy from who knows where, were dumped awkwardly next to my own. I realized right then that this guy's idea of living here was seriously different from mine. "What's your story, man?" "I don't remember signing a lease transfer or anything," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady while my brain frantically scrambled to make sense of this. Alex scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, I get that a lot. But Mrs. Pearl at the building office? She said I'm on the lease now. Maybe you missed a call or something?" Mrs. Pearl, that name rang a bell. The building manager, this older lady who ran the place like clockwork, with a sharp attitude and a knack for knowing everyone's business. If she said Alex had moved in, maybe there was more to this than a random trespasser. Trying to bring some order to the chaos, I glanced around. The apartment wasn't exactly our shared space yet, but having this stranger in my territory was unwelcome, no matter how chill he looked. I still had no clue who this Alex was or why he thought this was his place, and honestly, I was starting to wonder if I'd lost a step during the renting process or if some big mix-up had happened behind my back. "Look," I said, "I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I don't remember you being my roommate." or even meeting you before today." He gave me a thoughtful nod, his half smile softening a bit. "Yeah, I figured it might be weird. I mean, I didn't exactly just pop into your life on my own. There was some paperwork stuff with Mrs. Pearl, probably a mix-up, but I'm just trying to make it work." I frowned, crossing my arms. "You're telling me you jumped into some lease transfer without telling me? That's a bit bold." Alex shrugged, still calm but not overly defensive. "You'd be surprised how these things happen. With the building's admin being a pain, paperwork can get messy. I just wanted a place in this neighborhood and this one popped up." I stared at him for a moment. Part of me wanted to scream at this guy to get out, or at least demand some answers. The other part was just stuck in this weird limbo between disbelief and mild fascination. Somehow, I was sharing a home with a guy I didn't even know, and none of it made sense. The hours after that were awkward, to say the least. Alex started unloading his stuff into corners of the apartment I claimed as mine, while I tried to keep the peace without losing my mind. Our conversations were stilted, filled with pauses like two strangers forced onto the same tiny stage. Every once in a while, he would mention Mrs. Danes. Pearl again, like a lifeline to explain his presence. I couldn't shake this ticking question. Was I really losing track of my own life? Had I somehow forgotten signing off on all this? Or was I about to be scammed by some smooth-talking renter riding the cracks of the city's messy housing market? To clear my head, I decided I'd get some answers the old-fashioned way, talking to the people who actually knew the building better than I did. Maybe Mrs. Pearl, maybe some neighbors. I needed to know if Alex's story held any water or if I was just being played. That night, lying on my couch alone, despite the new occupant's shadow lurking somewhere in the apartment, I felt the pull of this mystery tighten around me. This wasn't just a random roommate problem, something else was going on, and it was just the beginning. The first few days with Alex around were like trying to navigate a conversation in a foreign language without any phrasebook. We'd manage the basics, talk about bills, who's using what in the kitchen, but anything deeper just sort of stalled. Like trying to push a door that clearly says pull. He was polite but elusive, always careful not to say too much about himself, or maybe too hesitant to. I kept catching him moving things around when I wasn't looking, subtly shifting his stuff into new corners, or touching my things just enough to make me twitch internally. One morning, I grabbed a coffee and tried to pin him down a bit more. "So, Alex, how exactly did you end up listed on the lease? Did Mrs. Pearl explain any of that?" He shrugged, eyes flicking to the floor like the answer was something uncomfortable to say out loud. "Look, I think it all started with the previous tenant. She left in a hurry. Some kind of mix-up with the lease, and Mrs. Pearl, well, you know how she is. She patched things together without much paperwork. Said it was easier for her this way." I nodded slowly, my brow furrowing. "Okay, but the previous tenant? Who was that?" "Some woman," Alex said vaguely. "I'm pretty sure she signed something that got messed up. I'm just filling the gap where she left off, I guess." That didn't clear anything up, of course, so I decided to take a little reconnaissance over to Mrs. Ent's Pearl's office the very next day. The building manager's domain was like entering a suspiciously neat jungle rows of mailboxes, stacks of old eviction notices, and her behind a cluttered desk that looked like the command center for some secret, low-key real estate war. I asked about the lease and Alex, and she gave me one of those looks that felt like a mix between amusement and mild exasperation. "Oh, that story again," she said, tapping her pen against her lip. "Look, when the former tenant disappeared, papers got shuffled. I didn't want the place sitting empty, so it seemed practical to let Alex move in. He seemed responsible enough and honestly a better option than the last batch of renters." "I see," I said, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. "But did that include me? Because last time I checked, the apartment was all mine." She gave me a sly grin. "It's a little more complicated than that. The lease should have been transferred properly, paperwork and all. But you're not the first to walk in here surprised by a new roommate." "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle." So there it was, officially unofficial. Alex was living here probably for months, but the legal side of things was hanging in limbo like one of those bomb shelters in old movies waiting to collapse. The bigger question now? Whose side was he really on? Because while he talked a good game about wanting to make himself at home, his answers had this guarded quality, like he was waiting for me to finally tell him to get lost. I tried chatting up a few neighbors to see if anyone had pieced together the story. Funny thing is, the community had their own versions, each more colorful than the last. The lady on the second floor swore she'd heard a loud, angry argument involving the previous tenant somewhere around the end of last spring. The guy across the hall mentioned a notice about unpaid rent that vanished mysteriously. One neighbor was convinced Alex was some kind of undercover property scout sent to make trouble for the landlord. I was stuck in this weird middle ground, half annoyed roommate, half detective in a low-budget mystery. Every tiny win-like learning about the tenant drama or hearing a new rumor about Alex's background just pulled me deeper into a confusing vortex of questions. But there was no clear villain, no obvious scapegoat. That tension reached a boiling point one evening. I found Alex sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone, looking unusually serious. "You're not planning to just stay, huh?" I blurted, unable to hold it in. He looked up, a flicker of something unreadable behind his eyes. "I have nowhere else right now. Look, I'm not here to cause trouble, I'm just stuck in this mess like you." That hit me like a sucker punch. Suddenly, the lines between stranger and someone trapped by circumstance felt blurred. But it also set off this nagging doubt. Was I really losing it? Because here I was, doubting everything I thought I knew about my own apartment, my own memories. That night, I lay awake wondering if I was the only one losing grip on reality. Who was Alex really? And what else was I missing in this strange, tangled story that had become more than just a roommate problem? It was the look in Alex's eyes, the flicker of genuine vulnerability that finally cracked the wall I built between us. Up until then, I treated him like an intruder who accidentally forgot to knock and decided to unpack instead. But in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about some mix-up or convoluted lease drama. It was a human story tangled up in the chaos that made city living a constant, embarrassing mess of coincidences and dead ends. The next morning, I swallowed whatever pride I had left and decided we needed to get to the bottom of this. Mrs. Pearl agreed to meet with both of us at her office, like some rare unofficial mediation in the middle of her domain. It was less formal than I expected. 3 of us crowded around her cluttered desk, sunlight catching on yellowed paperwork scattered everywhere. She cleared her throat and started explaining. Turns out, the previous tenant the woman Alex kept referring to vaguely had indeed vanished without a trace, according to Mrs. Day. Pearl, there was a backlog of unpaid rent, lost paperwork, and some urgent need to fill the unit so it didn't sit empty for months. The building was, frankly, sick of the legal limbo that came with abandoned leases. "So, Mrs. Pearl said, squinting at a stapled stack of papers. "I made a quick call to Alex to move in temporarily. The catch? It was never properly recorded at the leasing office because I wanted to avoid the red tape. They assumed you'd figure it out once the paperwork caught up." "And I never got a call," I pointed out, feeling all the more disoriented. "If this was supposed to be temporary, why was Alex here all along, without telling me?" Mrs. Pearl shrugged like it was the maddening normal for her. "Look, I'm sorry, but sometimes things slip through the cracks. You two should have talked sooner, but hey, it's part of the charm running an older building like this." Alex rubbed the back of his neck, glancing between Mrs. Pearl and me. "I didn't mean to sneak in or anything. I called a few times, but something always got lost. I just needed a roof." So, here was the twist. The whole roommate situation wasn't a weird scam or some sinister plot to take over my apartment. It was an honest disaster wrapped in bureaucracy and miscommunication. Mrs. Pearl's shortcut had stuck Alex in a limbo where legally he was homeless, but practically he was sharing my space. We hashed out a plan to get the lease officially amended, making sure the paperwork finally caught up with reality. Alex promised to keep his muddy sneakers at the door, and I vowed to try not to jump at every rustle or shift of his scattered belongings. But here's the unexpected bit. After all that turmoil and weirdness, I found myself appreciating having Alex around more than I thought I would. He wasn't just a squatter or a mystery guest. He was a guy just trying to figure it out like the rest of us. And through all the awkward conversations and suspicious glances, he reminded me how messy life is when trust and boundaries blur in the same tiny apartment. As for Mrs. Pearl, she got a rare gold star from me for managing to land us both in the same place, even if it took a little chaos to get there. I still look at that kitchen counter sometimes, where his coffee mugs sit next to mine, and chuckle at how fate, a missing tenant, and a middle-aged building manager rewrote the script for my quiet solo life. It doesn't sound like an ideal roommate story, but honestly, if this isn't the kind of twist your life throws you, maybe it's not so bad after all.